there, and welcome to Labour Media. When you hear the word socialism, what comes to mind? For many of you, you may think of it as an ideology wherein the workers own the means of production, distribution, and exchange. You may think of it as the transitional phase between capitalism and communism. You may think of it as an umbrella term encompassing all left-wing ideologies from Marxist-Leninism to anarchism to libertarian socialism to syndicalism. You know, there's too many of these, and you might think it's all free and more. However, if you're a newcomer to socialism, or if you aren't politically affiliated with it, especially if you're from a wealthier Western liberal democracy, you may have heard of socialism by a couple buzzwords. Universal healthcare, high taxes on the rich, union power, social safety net. Now, yes, all these things are socialistic ideas and or would be implemented under a socialist society. Under socialism, everyone's material needs to be met, and there would likely be a heavy progressive income tax as outlined in the Communist Manifesto in order to achieve the system. I also personally think that unions play a key role in helping us achieve a socialist society, and should be one of the main ways to democratise our institutions before and after socialism has been achieved. However, these ideas have one thing in common. None of them rely on the abolition of capitalism. They are not, in and of themselves, socialist, as they do not entail the workers seizing the means of production. Many people new to the left who call themselves socialists actually advocate for capitalism with stipulations such as these rather than actual socialism. I should know I was one once. This position is called social democracy, and it is the actual philosophy of many so-called socialist places. Social democrats include people such as Bernie Sanders, Robert Reich, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, while socially democratic countries include the Scandinavian countries such as Norway and Denmark, as well as Venezuela, and probably Germany given many of its institutions and how it's being run by the SPD, the German Social Democratic Party. More on them later. Let's take a deeper look at what social democracy is and how it differs to socialism. I think it's best if we start off with some breaking news. Karl Marx, a founding father of the socialist movement, co-writer of the Communist Manifesto, writer of Das Kapital among many other volumes, he's dead. Dead as a doornail. The poor lad's 6 feet under. Problem with that is, a lot of Karl's work's been left unfinished following his death, and with everyone scraping together to try and finish up his theories, there's left a lot of division in interpretation within the socialist movement. This led to a split in the followers of Marxism, big surprise, that being between the orthodox Marxists, who seek to continue what Marx wrote with some alterations, and the revisionary Marxists, whose ideas changed one or more fundamental Marxist concepts to turn his ideas into entirely new ideologies. For more information on this, I highly recommend Azure Scapegoat's video on the definitions of Marxism, communism, and socialism. Honestly, I think it's essential viewing for anyone with any remote interest in political ideologies and new leftists. Anyway, social democracy is a form of revisionary Marxism where Marx's ideas have become so twisted as not to resemble socialism anymore. Social democracy keeps capitalism around, with it strongly favouring private enterprise over state enterprise. Furthermore, it doesn't involve workers seizing the means of production or the abolition of wage labour, but rather keeps around the class division between the bourgeois owner class and the proletarian working class. It also keeps the same system of representative democracy as liberal democracy, albeit with more finance reform and anti-corruption laws. The main aspect where social democracy differs from typical liberal democracy is its social safety net, wherein healthcare is both free and to a high standard, higher education is free, and there are a variety of institutions to prevent people succumbing to the conditions of poverty. Now, many liberal democracies have things such as free healthcare, but socially democratic states generally have better funded versions of these systems that are less meddled with. Social democracies also lean more towards social justice than their liberal counterparts, with a more rehabilitative justice system in many of them, and with a high likelihood of having better social rights for women and minorities than liberal democracies. In summary, social democracies are remnants of the post-war consensus that combine a capitalist, heavily privatised economy with strong welfare state, social reform, rehabilitative justice, and a higher standard of labour law. They're probably the easiest thing to imagine for someone who wants to progress past the injustices of capitalism. Can't imagine a post-capitalist society. So then, why the aggressive title? Why do socialists and social democrats often not see eye to eye? What's wrong with the proposed best of both worlds? Well, there are a couple of reasons. First of all, if you've seen any Bernie Sanders killing Rosa Luxemburg memes, social democrats have an history of betraying the left. Clearest example of this was when the German SPD was in power during the time of the Weimar Republic. In 1919, many German communist socialists and folk all across the German working class, led by figures such as Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, staged a Sparkist uprising, a popular revolt resulting from the political and economic calamity caused by the Treaty of Versailles, particularly the massive reparations Germany had to pay. There was also the fact that the government was broadly incompetent and its coalitions were heavily fractured. The Spartakists did actually seize the means of production, particularly the presses. And what did the Social Democratic SPD do? They sent the far-right Freikorps on them, with many workers being brutally massacred in this suppression, and many more being executed in trials thereafter. This backfired spectacularly when the Freikorps staged their own revolt the next year through the Cap Push, forcing the SPD to come crawling back to the workers and asking them to strike so the push would fail, which they did, and it did. Another example that hits close to home for a lover of old Labour such as I was when in the UK, 1981, during the reign of Thatcher Conservatives, a sect of the Labour Party broke away as they thought the mainstream party was going too far left. These Social Democrats formed the Social Democratic Party, not that one, and proceeded to fail miserably, causing alliance with the Liberals forming the Liberal Democrats, a party that to this day has been a thorn in the side of Labour and the socialist movement. Like most ideologies that are close to the centre, social democracy serves the interests of capital and their institutions will rely on fascists to keep away the left with violence. This is not so much towards social democrat individuals, but more social democracy as an idea and its parties and governments. I follow closely many of the works of Robert Reich, and I do appreciate the work of Bernie and AOC to push the Overton window and the union movement. I view many social democrats as my comrades, if woefully misguided ones. Another critique towards social democracy is what funds it, that being the same stuff that funds liberal democracy. Sure, these states do have higher taxes for some part, but the capitalist tendency of imperialism is alive and well. The Scandinavian countries, for instance, don't have the same colonial histories as places such as the UK or the US, where their economies have been built on by genocide after genocide. They do engage in unequal exchange with developing nations. Scandinavian companies still exploit immigrant labour at home and cheap labour abroad. If you want to know more about this, just watch any Hakim video. Seriously, he's great. I know that's the second Marxist I've referenced today, but they're great channels. I do a video on my favourite leftist channels, but reminds me of actually. Anyhow, social democracy still has capitalist class stratification, the centralisation of wealth in a few hands, institutional discrimination on the basis of race, class, gender, sexuality, etc., the need for infinite growth on a finite planet, and wage labour, which uses profit to rob the working people. It's better than regular neoliberalism and liberal democracy, sure. We can do better than the lesser of two evils. The main purpose of this video is a somewhat arbitrary semantic one, that being that social democracy is different to socialism in its embrace of a friendlier capitalism. However, I think it's important that leftists hear this so that we don't rely on social democracy when we should be aiming for revolution over reform. So many people hold on to social democracies and don't talk about true socialist achievements such as the emancipation of Cuba from the grips of its oligarchy or the advancement of science and art under the USSR, not to mention the alleviation of poverty under these systems and their stability even in the face of Western imperialism. These systems were, and in the case of remaining socialist countries like Cuba or Vietnam, are worthy of criticism and have implemented measures that I do oppose, but they have achieved great things and should be looked at through an objective lens. I agree with many of the reforms pushed by social democrats, and if you're a social democrat watching this video, or a socialist who realised their own social democrat leanings and watching this, I'm glad you've got this far, especially with how even social democracy is suppressed under capitalism. Look what the democratic establishment did to Bernie. It's hard for us who've lived under capitalism all our lives to imagine a world completely devoid of it. But as capitalist industry continues to pillage the environment and drive up the wealth gap between rich and poor people, as well as rich and poor countries, we must institute radical change. We must force the hand of the capitalist establishment and then tear it down. Trust me, we'll still be here if you decide to radicalise, and we'll be lucky to have you. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this righteous rant, consider subscribing and hitting the like button. Whilst it's still around, give a dislike button, it's only a matter of time. As always, the transcript for this piece is in the description along with the other YouTubes I referenced. They make great content and I highly recommend them. Solidarity forever and all. This has been Labour Media, and remember, Labour conquers all.